My name is James. I'm 45 years old and I'm a senior partner at one of New York's top investment banks. Just yesterday, my wife Mary and I just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary. We threw a huge party at our penthouse on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and invited all of our friends and family. On the surface, our marriage is textbook beautiful. A successful husband, an elegant and sensual wife, two smart and understanding sons, and an enviable mansion. But only I know how many unknown cracks lie beneath this perfect surface. Looking back, it seems like yesterday that Mary and I met by chance on the campus of Columbia University in the spring of 1998. I was a young business student and Mary was a talented English major. I was captivated by her bright smile and sharp mind and began a frantic pursuit. Soon, we fell in love. After college, we both stayed in New York. I started my career in finance on Wall Street and Mary went into an advertising agency. Our careers both went well, and 5 years later, we had a big wedding. Shortly after our wedding, our oldest son Eden was born, followed by our youngest son Noah. Life couldn't seem to get any more perfect. However, as we grow older and develop our careers, the distance between us is creeping up. I buried myself in my work, often leaving early and returning late. Mary, on the other hand, has devoted herself to her career and is now an executive at the advertising agency. The communication between us became less and less, and our intimate moments became few and far between. Just last night at our anniversary party, as I stood in front of all the guests and looked back fondly on our 20 years of marriage, I noticed a little twinkle in Mary's eye. She had a smile on her face, but that smile failed to reach the bottom of her eyes. At that moment, I suddenly realized that our marriage might have come to an end. After the party, when all the guests had left, I stood alone on the balcony, looking out over the glittering New York nightscape, and couldn't help but get lost in thought. Is our marriage still salvageable? Do I still love Mary? And does she still love me? These questions swirled in my mind and could not be put to rest for a long time. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was a text message from Amelia, a gallery owner I'd recently met at a charity dinner and had often corresponded with at work since. In her text, she congratulated us on our anniversary and also invited me to visit the new exhibition at her gallery. I stared at my cell phone screen for a long time without replying. I knew that I was standing at a crossroads in my life. Every decision I made next would profoundly affect my future. But at the moment, the only thing I was sure of was that change was coming. In the days following the anniversary party, the atmosphere between Mary and I became more subtle. We both seemed to be trying to maintain an outward calm, but the rift inside was growing. That day, I was concentrating on an important merger and acquisition case in my office when my cell phone suddenly vibrated like crazy. I glanced at it and realized it was 7 missed calls from Mary. I sighed and texted her back, "In an important meeting, we'll call you later." When I got home in the evening, Mary was busy in the kitchen. I smelled the aroma of my favorite steak and felt a little guilty. "Honey, I'm sorry, it's just been a really busy day." I walked over to her and tried to give her a hug. Mary, however, ducked away and said coldly, "Too busy to make a phone call." "James, do you know what day it is?" I froze, my mind racing, but I still couldn't remember. "You forgot." Mary shook her head in disappointment. "It's Noah's final concert today. He especially wants you to go." "Crap, I totally forgot about this." "Mary, Stop it," Mary interrupted. "Noah's disappointed, but he's used to it. James, do you still care about this family or not?" We began a heated argument, with Mary accusing me of always putting my work first and neglecting my family. I argued that everything I did was for the family. The argument ended with Mary slamming the door. The next day, I attended the company's annual reception. Just as I was carrying champagne and forcing a smile as I exchanged pleasantries with my clients, a familiar voice came from behind me. "It seems our president James has a lot on his mind." I turned around and saw Amelia looking at me with a smile on her face. She was wearing a dark blue evening gown, elegant and sensual. "Amelia," I smiled, "I didn't expect to run into you here. I'm here on behalf of the gallery." She shook the champagne in her hand. "What? Not happy to meet me?" "Why?" I said heartily. "Seeing you instead was the only highlight of the evening." We chatted about our recent work and talked about the challenges that each of us had encountered. Without realizing it, I found myself relaxing. Amelia always has this magic power to make me forget my worries. James, Amelia suddenly looked at me seriously. I know you've been under a lot of stress lately. If you need someone to talk to, feel free to reach out to me. I was a little moved and was about to say something when my cell phone rang again. It was Mary. I hesitated, but hung up. Work? Amelia asked. I shook my head. Nothing. Let's keep talking. I got home late that night. The house was dark, with only a desk lamp still lit in the study. I gently pushed open the bedroom door and saw that Mary was already asleep. In the darkness, I gazed longingly at Mary's sleeping face. Once, this familiar face had tantalized me, and now, I felt an inexplicable detachment. I gently closed the door and returned to the study. Sitting at my desk, I pulled out my cell phone and hesitated long enough to send Amelia a message. Thank you for opening up tonight. Almost immediately, Amelia replied, anytime. Good night, James. I stared at the screen of my cell phone with mixed feelings. I knew that my marriage was on the brink of danger. But what was even more disturbing was that I realized I didn't seem to care about it as much as I expected. Life is as unpredictable as the weather in New York. Just when I thought my relationship with Mary had hit rock bottom, she suddenly became unusually busy. She said that her company had taken on a big project that required frequent business trips. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, I too often neglected my family for work. That night, Mary hurriedly packed her bags for her flight to Los Angeles early the next morning. Don't forget Noah's parent-teacher conference on Friday, I reminded her. I can take off work to attend. Mary froze for a moment, then smiled and said, Thank you, James. I'll try to make it back. I noticed her smile was a little forced, but I chose to remain silent. After Mary left, the house seemed extraordinarily cold. I habitually worked late and then ate takeout alone in my empty apartment. Just then, Amelia called and invited me to see a new exhibition at her gallery. Come on, James, she said over the phone. You need to relax. Besides, I promise this exhibit is definitely to your taste. It was late, but I hesitated and said yes. Amelia's gallery is located in the Chelsea neighborhood, surrounded by trendy art spaces. Walking in, I was immediately drawn to a huge abstract painting. The image is filled with intense brushstrokes and vibrant colors, as if it is speaking of some sort of internal struggle. Well, Amelia quietly walked over to me. I knew you'd like this one. I turned my head to find Amelia looking at me with a soft, expectant look. She looked especially beautiful in the soft light of the gallery. It was indeed great, I said heartily. Thank you for inviting me. We talked for a long time about everything from art to life, and Amelia was a wonderful listener who always seemed to understand my innermost thoughts. When she suggested going to a nearby bar to continue the conversation, I almost blurted out a yes. But just then, my sanity suddenly returned. I realized that I was slipping into a dangerous situation. I'm sorry, Amelia. I forced myself to say, I have to go home. Noah is waiting for me. Amelia looks a little disappointed, but quickly smiles with understanding. Of course, family comes first. Let's talk some other time. On the way home, I had incredibly mixed emotions. I didn't know if I had made the right choice, but I knew that I needed to revisit my marriage. A few days later, Mary returned from Los Angeles. She looked tired but excited and said the project was going well. As we routinely exchanged a kiss, I smelled an unfamiliar hint of cologne. That night, I tossed and turned. In the wee hours of the morning, I heard Mary's cell phone vibrate. Out of some kind of intuition, I quietly reached for her cell phone. A new message was displayed on the screen. Missed you. Can't wait to see you again. M. My heart sank hard. Who was M? I had never heard Mary mention this person. I tried to check further, but my phone was password locked. I carefully put my cell phone back down and pretended nothing had happened. But I knew that from this moment on, nothing would be the same. The next day, I asked my longtime friend David out for a drink. In a hidden Irish pub, I told him everything that had happened recently. David listened and was silent for a long time. Then he said, James, you need more evidence. If Mary is really cheating on you, you need to take the initiative. What do you mean? Get a private investigator. David looked me straight in the eye. You can't be too naive when it comes to things like this. I stared at the whiskey in my glass, struggling internally. The idea of tracking down Mary's whereabouts made me ill. But did I really have any other choice? Well, I finally said, "Do you know any reliable candidates?" David nodded, took out his cell phone and started dialing. It was at this moment that I felt like I had crossed some invisible line. I didn't know where this path would take me, but I knew that I had to face the truth, no matter how brutal it was. The private investigator's report came sooner than I expected. Just a week later, I received a thick envelope. I sat in my office, my fingers trembling as I opened it, and it contained a large number of photographs and a detailed report. The photos show Mary and a young man walking intimately together, talking and laughing. In one of the photos, they are holding each other's fingers in a fancy restaurant. To top it off, there is also a photo of them kissing in front of a hotel. I felt a wave of vertigo and had to clutch the edge of the table to steady myself. The man, I recognized, was Mary's assistant, Michael. He wasn't much older than our oldest son, Eden. I read the report carefully. According to the private detective's investigation, Mary and Michael's relationship has been going on for at least 3 months. They often use work as an excuse to meet, but they are actually cheating on each other. I stared at the pictures and felt my world crumble. 20 years of marriage, betrayed like this? I remembered Mary's recent unusual behavior, and it all made sense. I didn't go home that night. I drove to the Hudson River and sat quietly in my car, watching the river glisten in the moonlight. Images from the past kept flashing through my mind. The fluttering of Mary and I when we first met, our wedding, the joy when our children were born. All these wonderful memories were now becoming bitter. I pulled out my cell phone and saw a dozen missed calls, all from Mary. There was also a text message, "James, are you okay? I'm worried about you." I sneered and turned off my phone. For the next few days, I wandered like a ghost between my home and my office. I acted as if nothing had happened on the outside, but inside I was struggling fiercely. Should I confront Mary directly? Or should I secretly plan my counterattack as she had hidden from me? Friday night, Mary suggested we go to a movie. She said we've both been so busy lately and needed more time for two. I reluctantly agreed. In the dim light of the movie theater, Mary leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "James, I love you." I felt a wave of revulsion, but forced myself to say, "I love you too." It was at that moment that I made my decision. I couldn't just forgive her. I needed to give her a taste of betrayal. The next day, I made an excuse that I had to work late and actually went to see my lawyer friend. I asked in detail about matters relating to the divorce procedure and how to protect my interests in the division of property. "James, are you sure you want to do this?" the attorney asked me. "Maybe there's room for you guys to redeem yourselves?" I shook my head and smiled bitterly. Some things, once they happen, can't be undone. Over the next few weeks, I began secretly preparing for my divorce. I carefully organized all my financial documents and began to quietly transfer some of my assets. At the same time, I was gathering more evidence of Mary's infidelity. Every night, when Mary was asleep, I worked late into the night in my study. I scrutinized the New York State divorce laws and developed a detailed strategy. I knew I had to take the initiative in this battle. The other night, I was organizing my papers when I suddenly got a text from Amelia. "How have you been? Haven't seen you in a while." I stared at the screen of my phone and suddenly realized how long it had been since I had really relaxed. I replied, "It's okay, just a little busy at work. Want to get together for a cup of coffee sometime?" Amelia quickly replied, "Anytime." I put my phone down and continued my work. I knew that I needed to plan a perfect revenge, but at the same time, I felt a twinge of unease. Was I really ready to face the coming storm? Just then, I heard Mary roll over in her bedroom. I took a deep breath and told myself, there is no turning back. I have to be strong, for myself and for my children. I look at the family photo on my desk that we took last Christmas. We were all smiling so happily in the photo. Who would have thought that just 1 year later, everything would turn out like this? I gently touched the photo, then turned it upside down on the desktop. "It's time to face reality," I said to myself. "No matter what happens next, I have to be brave." Revenge is a meal that requires careful cooking. I spent a whole half-month preparing the feast, bit by bit. First, I contacted my old Harvard Law School classmate Jack, who is now one of the top divorce lawyers in New York. We spent an entire afternoon in his office plotting. "James, are you sure you want to do this?" Jack asked me. "Once you start, there's no turning back." I nodded bitterly. "There are some hurts that can't be undone." Jack sighed and then began explaining New York state divorce laws in detail. We discussed how to maximize my benefits and how to use Mary's cheating to get a favorable division of property and visitation rights for the children. Over the next few weeks, I began to quietly move assets. I opened a couple offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and moved some of my funds there. At the same time, I started buying assets that were not easy to track, such as Bitcoin and some artwork. Every step of the way, I was careful that Mary would find out. I even hired a cybersecurity expert to protect my computer and cell phone. At the same time, I began to consciously alienate Mary. I worked more and more overtime and came home later and later. When she asked, I always used the excuse that I was busy at work. One night, out of the blue, Mary offered to talk to me. "James, has something happened lately?" she asked, a hint of concern in her eyes. "You always seem to be avoiding me." I forced myself to give a tired smile. "It's nothing, just a bit of stress at work. Recently, the company is preparing for a big project, and I might need more time." Mary nodded thoughtfully, but I could sense she wasn't entirely convinced by my explanation. Amelia became my only solace in this process. We began to meet frequently, sometimes at her gallery, sometimes on a bench in Central Park. We talked, walked, and admired art as if we were in another world. Once, Amelia suddenly asked me, "James, you seem preoccupied lately. Is there something wrong at home?" I hesitated, but decided to be honest with her. "Amelia, I may be getting a divorce." Amelia looked at me in surprise, then gently took my hand. "I'll be there for you no matter what happens." I looked at her gratefully, suddenly realizing that I might be falling into another relationship. But right now, I don't have time to think about that. Back home, I continued my plan. I began to gather more evidence of Mary's infidelity. I installed a hidden camera to record every secret meeting between Mary and Michael. I quietly recorded their phone records and saved every ambiguous text message between them. Every time I see this evidence, I feel a sharp pain. But I knew that they were necessary. I needed to have the absolute upper hand in court. At the same time, I started preparing for the kids. I'm spending more time with Eden and Noah, taking them to games and playing golf together. I wanted to give them as many good memories as possible before the storm hit. One night, out of the blue, Noah asked me, "Daddy, is something wrong with you and Mommy?" I froze, not knowing how to respond. Finally, I just patted him on the shoulder and said, "No matter what happens, Daddy will always love you." Time passed day by day, and my plan became more and more perfect. I prepared detailed financial reports, collected tons of evidence, and even scouted out a place to live after the divorce. Finally, on a Friday night, I decided it was time. I bought a bottle of Mary's favorite red wine and prepared a nice dinner. I was going to give our marriage a decent burial. When Mary pushed open the door to her home, she looked in amazement at the candlelight and food on the table. "James, this is—" I smiled and raised my glass. "Here, cheers to us." Mary looked at me quizzically, but picked up her glass. The very moment our glasses touched, I knew that all would be revealed. My revenge meal, finally, will begin to be served. Christmas Eve is always magical, but this year's magic seemed extraordinarily different. The first snowfall of the winter fell in New York, casting a tranquil white veil over the hustle and bustle of the city. As our family gathered around the living room to decorate the tree, the atmosphere was ostensibly joyous, and Mary hung the last of the colored balls from the branches, stepping back in satisfaction to admire our masterpiece. "The trees are so beautiful this year," she smiled. "Aren't they, James?" I forced a smile and nodded. Eden and Noah were arguing about whether they should put the angel or the star at the top of the tree when I walked over and said softly, "Why don't we take turns? Use the angel this year and the star next year." The kids agreed to the proposal, and I helped Noah secure the angel to the top of the tree. Watching his excitement gave me a twinge in my heart. I knew that this might be the last Christmas we would spend as a complete family. After dinner, Mary suggested we play a game. Everyone say what they're most thankful for this year, she suggested. Eden said he was thankful for being accepted to the college of his dreams, and Noah was thankful that he had earned a starting position on the soccer team. When it was Mary's turn, she looked at each of us with tears in her eyes. I am most thankful for having you as my family. You are the most important people in my life. I felt a wave of dizziness and could barely breathe. As all eyes turned to me, I barely managed to say, I'm thankful to have a night like this with you all. The kids quickly went to bed, leaving Mary and I in the living room. She leaned over my shoulder and whispered, James, has something been wrong between us lately? I feel like you've been distancing yourself from me. I took a deep breath and knew the time had come. Mary, we do need to talk, but not right now, okay? Let's get through this Christmas Eve first. She nodded, but I could sense her unease. We looked out the window at the snowy landscape in silence, each with our own thoughts. Just after midnight, I quietly got up and removed the long-prepared papers from my study. I placed the divorce papers and all the evidence in a beautiful gift box, tied it with a red ribbon, and carefully placed it under the Christmas tree, right in the middle of the other gifts. After doing so, I stood there and gazed longingly at our family photo. 20 years of marriage. Was this the end of it? I felt a wave of unprecedented loneliness and fear. It was just after dawn when I heard Mary's screams. I took a deep breath and walked out of the bedroom. Mary was kneeling in front of the Christmas tree, clutching the gift box in her hand, her face pale. What is it, James? What the hell is it? Her voice was shaking. I said calmly, You know what that is, Mary. Just then Eden and Noah were woken up as well and walked into the living room confused. Mom, what's wrong? Eden asked. Mary looked at the children and then at me with fear and pleading in her eyes. But I had made up my mind that I would not be soft. Kids, I took a deep breath. Your mom and I are getting a divorce. The scene that ensued can best be described as chaotic. Noah immediately burst into tears, and Eden angrily questioned us about what had happened. Mary tried to explain, but was interrupted by her own sobs with every word. I tried to stay calm and explained, Your mom betrayed me and this family. I have all the evidence I need. Mary broke down, falling to her knees and saying, I'm sorry, over and over again. While Eden held a crying Noah in her arms, her eyes filled with confusion and disappointment. I felt a strong pang of guilt. Was this what I wanted? To watch the people I loved so much suffer? But I knew there was no turning back. I'm going to move out for a while, I said. Eden, Noah, I hope you understand that it's not your fault. I'll always love you guys. I went back to my bedroom and grabbed my long-packed bags. As I walked toward the door, Mary stopped me. James, please, she sobbed. We can start over, I'll change. I looked into her eyes, and once I thought I could find the whole world there. But now, all I see is betrayal and lies. Bye, Mary, I whispered and turned to leave. The moment I stepped out of my house, the cold wind of New York hit me in the face. I stood in the midst of the flying snowflakes and wondered what the future held. But I knew that starting today, a new page would be turned in my life. Whatever awaits me ahead, I must face it with courage. For this is the path I have chosen, a path that leads to freedom, dignity, and new life. The first week away from home, I stayed in a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Every morning when I woke up, it took me a few seconds to remember where I was. The skyscrapers outside my window reminded me that my life had been turned upside down. I opened my laptop and began to proceed with my long-planned plan. I sent a series of emails to Mary's coworkers, friends, and family, each accompanied by detailed evidence exposing her affair with Michael. After sending the last email, I shut down my computer and felt a wave of mixed emotions rush over me. Is this what revenge feels like? I had expected to feel pleasure, but in reality there was only an emptiness. The next morning I received a flood of responses. Mary's sister Julie called me with shock and sympathy in her voice. James, I can't believe Mary would do this. Are you okay? I forced a smile and said, I'll be fine, Julie. Thanks for asking. After hanging up, I got a text from David. Dude, need a drink with you? I replied, some other time. I need to be alone right now. Just then, Amelia called. Her voice was gentle and concerned. James, I just heard what happened. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over and stay with you? I hesitated and finally said, Thank you, Amelia, but I think I need some time to organize my thoughts. After hanging up the phone, I suddenly felt a wave of loneliness I had never felt before. I grabbed my jacket and decided to go for a walk. The streets of New York were still bustling with people hurrying to their respective destinations, as if the end of my world had nothing to do with them. I walked aimlessly and eventually found myself in Central Park. Sitting on a bench by the lake, I began to think back on everything that had happened in the meantime. My plan for revenge was on track, but I felt more and more confused. Was I really doing the right thing? Just then, my cell phone rang. It was Eden. Dad. His voice sounded tired. Can we talk? I agreed immediately. Half an hour later, we met in the park. Eden looked quite haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, and it was obvious that he hadn't slept well for a while. Dad, why did it turn out like this? He asked, confusion and pain in his voice. I took a deep breath and explained as calmly as I could, Eden, sometimes the adult world is complicated. Your mom did something that hurt me and hurt this family. I know this is hard for you and Noah to accept, but I hope you understand that it's not your fault. Eden was silent for a moment, then said, Noah's been crying a lot lately. He thinks he did something wrong to cause you to separate. I felt my heart cut out. I immediately said, I'm going to see Noah tonight. Eden, can you take care of him for me? Eden nods and I see a glint of maturity in his eyes. Later that night, I came home. As soon as Noah saw me, he jumped into my arms and cried like a little kid. I hugged him tightly and felt tears welling up in my eyes. Noah, listen to me, I whispered. No matter what happens, I will always love you and Eden. It's not your fault, understand? Noah nods, but still clings to me. Just then, Mary walked in. She looked haggard and obviously hadn't had a good few days. James, she whispered, can we talk? I look at Noah and nod. We walked out onto the balcony, leaving the kids in the living room. I was suspended, Mary said, exhaustion and remorse in her voice. The company found out about Michael and I. Michael was fired too. I didn't say anything, just looked at her quietly. James, I know I made a big mistake, Mary continued, but please believe that I never meant to hurt you or the kids. I don't know what I was thinking. I took a deep breath and tried to control my emotions. Mary, it's too late for that. Let's just talk about the divorce. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was a text from Amelia. James, if you need any help, I'm always here. I looked at the message and suddenly realized that even though my world seemed to be falling apart, new hope might already be creeping in. As I left the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. I knew that there was still a long road ahead, but at least I had taken the first step. Back at the hotel, I sat in front of the window and looked at the night view of New York. This city that never sleeps has witnessed the sorrows and joys of countless people. And now, it is witnessing my new life. I picked up my phone and sent a message back to Amelia. Thank you, Amelia. We can talk some other time. After sending this message, I felt something in my heart slowly heal. I know that the storm continues, but I have seen the calm in the eye of the storm. Whatever the future holds, I will face it with courage, because I know that this is not the end, but a new beginning. Life is always full of surprises. Just when I thought everything was going according to plan, fate dealt me a blow. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in my office on a conference call with a client when I suddenly got a call from Eden. I wanted to ring it off, but a sense of foreboding made me pick it up anyway. Dad, Eden's voice trembled. Mom was in a car accident. I felt my blood instantly freeze. Even though Mary had hurt me, she was, after all, the mother of my children and had been an important part of my life. How is she? I forced myself to calm down. It's not going well, Eden said. The doctor said it might require surgery. Noah and I are already at the hospital. I immediately ended the meeting and rushed out of the office. Sitting in the cab, a million images flashed through my mind. The first time Mary smiled at me, our wedding, her tired but happy face when the kids were born. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw Eden and Noah sitting on a bench outside the emergency room. Noah jumped at me as soon as he saw me and couldn't stop the tears. I hugged him tightly and felt his body shaking. "Daddy," Noah choked out, "Mommy's going to be okay, right?" I rubbed his back and said, "It will be. Mom is a strong person. She'll be fine." But I know in my heart that I can't be sure of that at all. Hours passed, and we still hadn't gotten any news. Eden sat in silence, checking his phone every now and then. Noah leaned on my shoulder and eventually fell asleep in exhaustion. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was a text from Amelia. "James, I just heard about Mary's car accident. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over and stay with you?" I looked at the message and a warmth welled up in my heart. Even at a time like this, Amelia was still thinking of me. But I know that now is not the right time. I replied, "Thank you, Amelia, but I think I need to be with the kids." Amelia quickly replies, "I understand. If you need any help, feel free to let me know." Just then, the door to the operating room opened. A doctor stepped out, and the look on his face made my heart sink. "Mr. James?" he asked. I stood up and gently placed Noah on the bench. "I am. How's Mary?" The doctor took a deep breath. "The surgery was successful, but Mrs. Mary has lost a lot of blood and is still in critical condition. The next 24 hours are critical." I felt a wave of dizziness and had to hold onto the wall to stay on my feet. Eden came over to hold me up and asked, "Dad, are you okay?" I nodded and forced myself to calm down. "Can we go check on her?" I asked the doctor. "Yes, but only one person can go in, and not for too long." I looked at the kids and said, "You guys go ahead." Eden and Noah took turns going in and checking on Mary. When they came out, Noah's eyes were red again, and Eden looked like she wanted to talk. "Dad," Eden finally said, "maybe you should go inside." I hesitated and finally nodded. Walking into the ICU, my heart clenched hard when I saw Mary lying on a hospital bed, connected to various instruments. She looked so fragile, a far cry from the vibrant woman I remembered. I walked over to the bed and gently took her hand. The hand that I had held countless times was now so cold that it shocked me. "Mary," I whispered, "you have to be strong. The kids need you." I paused, then continued, "I know a lot of things happened between us, but none of that matters. What matters is that you survive, for Eden and Noah." Just then, I felt Mary's fingers move slightly. I jerked my head up to see her eyelids fluttering. "Doctor," I yelled, "she's awake." Over the next few days, Mary gradually improved. When she was finally able to speak, she looked at me weakly and said, "James, I'm sorry for everything." I looked into her eyes, which were filled with sincere remorse. I suddenly realized that the resentment in my heart had dissipated a lot without me realizing it. "Mary," I said, "the most important thing right now is that you get well. We'll talk about the rest later." When I left the hospital, I called Amelia. When she picked up the phone, I said, "Amelia, thank you for your support during this time. I'd like to talk to you." Amelia was silent for a moment, then said, "I understand. Where are you now? Let's find a place to sit down and talk." Hanging up the phone, I looked out the window at the New York skyline. I knew that once again, my life stood at a turning point. But this time, instead of anger and pain, I felt a strange calm. Whatever the future holds, I know I can face it. Because I've been through the worst, and I'm still standing here, stronger than ever. Fall came earlier than usual in New York. As the first maple leaves began to yellow, I finally moved into my new apartment. It's a small loft in Brooklyn Heights, nowhere near as spacious as my previous mansion, but it gives me a sense of freedom I've never felt before. On moving day, Eden and Noah came to help. I felt a surge of relief as I watched them carry boxes and jokingly argue about who was stronger. The kids have been through so much these past few months, but they've clearly gotten stronger. "Dad," Noah asked as he wiped the sweat off his face, "can we come here for the weekend and spend the night?" I smiled and rubbed his hair. "Sure, whenever you guys want to come. This will always be your home." Eden set the last box down, looked around and said, "Not bad, Dad. Much better than I thought it would be." I knew he was trying to comfort me, but nodded gratefully. That evening, Amelia came to visit. She brought a pot of greenery as a housewarming gift. Makes the place a little bit livelier, she said with a smile. We sat on the balcony overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan skyline. As night fell, the city lights came on like diamonds dotted on black velvet. James, Amelia said softly, you look much more relaxed than before. I nodded, yeah. It feels like a heavy burden has been lifted. So, she hesitated, what kind of relationship are we in now? I turned my head and looked seriously into her eyes. Amelia, you've been my biggest support these past few months. I probably wouldn't have lasted without you, but I don't want to rush into a new relationship. I need time, and I hope you understand. Amelia smiled, understanding and tenderness shining in her eyes. I understand, James. I'll wait until you're ready. We smiled at each other and then continued to quietly enjoy the night. It was a moment of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, I went to the attorney's office to finalize the details of the divorce settlement. Although Mary's car accident had eased our relationship, we both understood that the marriage was beyond repair. James, said Jack, the lawyer, are you sure you don't want to reconsider the division of property in light of recent events? I shook my head. Just do what we agreed before. I don't want to dwell on it. After signing the last document, I felt a wave of relief. Walking out of the lawyer's building, with the warmth of the New York sun on my face, I took a deep breath, as if my whole body was lighter. Over the next few weeks, I started to get back into the swing of things. But this time, I decided to have a good work-life balance. Every Friday night, I ate dinner with the kids and listened to their stories about the fun things they were doing at school. One day, out of the blue, Eden asked me, Daddy, are you and Aunt Amelia dating? I almost choked on my water. We're just friends. Why are you asking this all of a sudden? Eden shrugged. Nothing. Just thought you seemed happy lately. If you guys do get together, me and Noah won't mind. I looked at Noah and he nodded in agreement. I felt a rush of warmth come over me, touched by the children's understanding and support. A few days later, I visited Mary in the hospital. She had been discharged from the hospital, but needed to be reviewed regularly. We sat in the hospital garden, surrounded by blooming fall chrysanthemums. James, Mary said softly, I want to thank you. You came when I needed it most. I looked at her and the resentment I once felt had dissipated, leaving only a sense of peace. Mary, no matter what happens, you will always be Eden and Noah's mother. We may no longer be husband and wife, but we are still family. Mary nodded with tears in her eyes. I know I made a big mistake, but I really appreciate your forgiveness. I hope we can still be friends. As I left the hospital, I texted Amelia, are you free tonight? I'd like to take you to dinner. Amelia quickly replied, sure, I'm looking forward to it. I stood in front of the hospital and watched the people come and go. Everyone has their own story, their own struggles and triumphs. And I, for one, was standing at the beginning of a new chapter in my story. I know that there is a long road ahead, but I am no longer afraid, for I have learned how to stay calm in the storm and how to find light in the darkness. I take a deep breath and stride toward the subway station. It was a sunny fall day in New York, and there was new hope in the air. I felt like the city, weathered but still strong. A new life has begun, and I, for one, am ready for it. Time flies, and before you know it, a year has passed. Spring in New York always comes unexpectedly, like those sudden turns in life. Today was a special day. I stood in front of the mirror, carefully tying my tie. Eden was busy in the kitchen, and the smell of fried eggs wafted throughout the apartment. Dad, he cried, are you sure you want to do this? I took a deep breath and walked out of the bedroom. Yes, I'm pretty sure. Today, I'm going to ask Amelia to marry me. Over the past year, our relationship has grown deeper. Amelia has given me enough time and space to heal myself, and I have slowly learned to trust and love again. She has become not only my partner, but an important part of Eden and Noah's lives. After breakfast, Eden hugged me. Good luck, Dad. Amelia is a good person, and we all love her. I patted him gratefully on the shoulder, my heart filled with warmth. We arranged to meet at Brooklyn Bridge Park. When I arrived, Amelia was already there, wearing a light blue dress that looked beautiful in the breeze. Hey, she said with a smile. Any particular reason why you're so formal today? I laughed nervously and took her hand. Come with me. We strolled down to the river and looked out over the Manhattan skyline. The glass windows of the skyscrapers reflected a golden glow in the sunlight, and the whole city seemed to be enveloped in a dreamy halo. Amelia. I turned to face her and took a deep breath. This past year, you gave me the courage to start over. Your understanding, support, and love have helped me find meaning in my life again. I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring box. Amelia Davis, will you marry me? Amelia covers her mouth in surprise, tears welling up in her eyes. She nodded, her voice catching, yes, I do. Just then Eden and Noah jumped out from behind a nearby tree, Noah with a cupcake in his hand. Amelia looked at them in surprise and then turned to me. You planned this? I smiled and nodded. They insisted on coming to witness this moment. The four of us celebrated in the park, our laughter crisp in the spring sunshine. A few days later, I received a text from Mary congratulating me and Amelia on our engagement. She said she was happy for me and thanked us for being able to deal with the past in a mature way. After reading the text message, I felt a strange calmness. What was once resentment and bitterness had now melted into a sense of equanimity. I replied, "Thank you, Mary. Hope you find your own happiness too." On Thanksgiving Day, we decided to have a big family dinner. I invited Mary, and she hesitated, but eventually said yes. When Mary arrived, the atmosphere was a little awkward. But Amelia greeted her warmly, and the kids were happy to see that we were able to get along peacefully. During dinner, I looked around. Eden was discussing his college life with Amelia. Noah was chatting with Mary about his soccer game, and David and his wife had arrived and were helping with dessert. Suddenly, I realized that this is what I've been looking for. Not a perfect family, but one filled with understanding, forgiveness, and love. After dinner, I stood alone on my balcony, looking out over Brooklyn at night. Amelia crept up to me and held my hand. Thinking about what? She asked softly. I turned to her and smiled. I was thinking how amazing life is. A year ago, I thought it was all over. But now, I feel like it's just beginning. Amelia leaned over my shoulder. Because you chose to forgive and start over. I nodded, suddenly remembering something. I walked back inside and took a journal off the shelf. It was the one I had started writing in during the most difficult of times. I turned to the last page and began to write down my feelings for the day. Today, I finally understood that true happiness is not the absence of storms, but the ability to smile even after the storms. I have lost some, but I have also gained more. I learned to forgive, to love again, and to accept my imperfect self. Life is like the seasons in New York. There are cold winters and warm springs. It is important that we have the courage to get through the cold winters and the wisdom to appreciate the beauty of each season. Now, standing on a new beginning, I no longer fear the future. Because I know that no matter what happens, I have the ability to face it, to grow, and to love. This is not the end, but a new beginning. I closed my journal and took a deep breath. Outside the window, the lights of Brooklyn dotted the night sky like countless fires of hope. I knew that no matter what the future held, I had found inner peace. This is my story, a story of betrayal, revenge, forgiveness, and rebirth. But more importantly, it's a story of how to find yourself in the midst of life's storms and bravely embrace a new life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.